Alright, so yesterday when I was done making my video for the evening, something came to my mind. Working isn't a solution to your financial problems, it's the cause of your financial problems. When you take a step back and you look at what you're earning per month, per week, per hour, and then you look at the cost of life, something doesn't seem to add up. Most of our mental problems in our current lives stem from the fact that we're financially insecure. Not only are we financially insecure, we're job insecure. If you think you have job safety, you're living in an alternative reality. I know that every single day that I come into my job, that today could be my last day. And I know this because I talk to a lot of people, like a lot of people on a daily basis, and not low level people. Yesterday, I spent about an hour talking to a woman that sits, I would say, two notches below the head of the corporation. In fact, he's going to be there today. Even though he doesn't live here, he's still coming into the office from another state 2 to 3 times a week. Reminds me of that CEO from Starbucks who was flying down from, or I guess flying up from California to Washington to sit in his office. Why? I don't know. The fact that he can afford an airplane to do that makes you wonder where all this money in our society gets wasted. Because I heard from at least four different people yesterday. Four different people who talked about how much money is wasted at the corporation. And they just talked about bucket loads of waste when the employees can't get a thing done. So, working isn't a solution to your financial problems. It's a way of looking at it because it highlights a paradox faced by many workers that hard work isn't the answer. Because as you work harder, you think you're working your way up to a particular goal, right? But the truth is, it's not going to work that way. If hourly work made people rich, there wouldn't be any homeless people. And it's something that someone pointed out in the comments last night is that we have 4% unemployment, but the amount of homelessness that has gone up in our society just in the past year is incredible. How is it possible to have 4% unemployment, yet talk about at least 20% increase in homelessness from the year before? And that's because more and more people are falling into the trap of working and being homeless. And prior to this year, many years ago, I read a statistic that said 55% of the homeless are working. They're living in their cars, they're living on the street, they're just not making enough for basic housing. Or they're like me, one paycheck away from losing everything. Just one paycheck. My margins for paying my bills is razor thin. You can't save money when you barely make enough money in order to pay your bills. I no longer make enough money because of inflation and the cost of everything else, having to do with inflation to make it to my next paycheck with just my paycheck. And that just slowly happened. Over 3 years with a 3% increase in pay, which is typical for any industry. 3%. I don't know what it's going to look like on Friday because we were supposed to get that raise this month, but I know there were a lot of employees who are very nervous about what it's going to look like. In fact, yesterday when I was talking to one of my high level contacts, we were texting back and forth for most of the evening, and she was talking about how bad my department is, how bad things are. And she's just simply put it that unless they make dramatic changes, nothing's going to get better. And I was like, well, um, in order to make dramatic changes, it's going to require dramatic amounts of money. And they're just not willing to invest money into workers. Corporations don't want their workers to be comfortable. If you have workers who are comfortable, they will get lazy. So you have to do something. And a round of firings, like someone mentioned in the comments, they've been firing people like crazy ever since we got new management 2 months ago. They have had people looking at every single job in the company. And there are hundreds of people that are no longer with the company because you you run a performance metrics on most people, and you're gonna see that it's it's tough to keep them around when their productivity is greatly diminished because they don't feel like working hard because it's not rewarding. Like when I get a lot of comments about Gen Z on my last video, and the fact is that, and this isn't my first or second or third. I think this is my fourth Gen Z that I've had since I started working at this company. And I'm typically not a person who has people working underneath me, right? I've always been a regular worker, a regular tech worker, right? So I would say that since I was a teenager, most of my jobs have been just computer repair, straight up repair. But this company brought me into a job in which started out in one position that was very low, then I got promoted, and then I've stayed. And gradually, they've just given me more and more and more responsibility to the point where I have the responsibility of a very senior level person without the senior level pay, which is something that I talk about, constantly. It's like they're trying to give people more responsibility for the same or less money, and people are reacting to that by saying no. I remember my first Gen Z that I hired, and I was like, we hired him, and all of them have the same backgrounds, right? They're all fast food, warehouse, and retail workers. Every one of them has had the same credentials because, again, Gen Z isn't getting the experience that they need in order to get good jobs. So when they go and apply to a job like this one, they're getting in, and the reason they're getting in is because the job is very, very low paying. And the expectations for a very low paying job, even though corporations don't want to admit this, the pay for low, for entry level jobs is supposed to be just that. It's supposed to be low pay for a low job. But somehow they keep getting disappointed when a person applies to a job within a corporation and they don't have basic computer skills. And then this isn't my department, this is other departments where you hire someone and they don't know how to use Microsoft Office, or they've never used a computer for work. They're still of that old mindset where they're still using paper for everything. In fact, this is how strange this is. I'm mentioning this, and there's an example of a salesperson who came in to manage a department for another office location. She didn't like computers so much that she made all of her salespeople go back to using paper and pencil, printing out things, forms. And the workers are like, what's going on here? Why are we going in reverse? Because if you're a manager and you really don't know how to use computers, you're going to force everyone else back onto your level. And I feel like that's what we've done as a society, is that entry level jobs have gone back to a level where they're not only minimum wage jobs, but you're getting people who are so unqualified for these jobs that you don't know what to do with them. And so you kind of like, you take a step back, you look at the situation. Why did this person apply to this job? Why was this person willing to take such low pay? Because low paying jobs are looking for desperation workers. People that don't really care what they do as long as they can get a paycheck. But even though they're getting that paycheck, it's not sufficient to pay for basic living costs. So it's that expression that I keep using. They can't afford to work. That's the vast majority of our entire population. The 99% can no longer afford to work. They can't afford the clothes. They can't afford an apartment. They can't afford overpriced food. And there is no alternative, right? If you're a desperation worker like myself, obviously I'm not comfortable in any job I've ever had in my entire life. I knew that every time I took a job that the chances were very good that I was going to lose my job because I'm in a no-win situation with any job that I've ever applied to. You can't win when the wages are so low, and you're not supposed to. If you look at the way the system is currently designed, every aspect of the system is working against you. Insufficient pay, no training, not enough experience, and on top of all of that, they're not expecting you to stay. They want you to come into this desperation job, do what you can in it with the bare minimum of investment in you. Basically, all they're going to do is hire you, use you for a few months, and then look at your overall work performance and say, well, we've got to do something. We've got to try another person. And the same thing can be said about the senior manager position. They bring them in, they overwork them, and then when they fail, because they're expecting them to do a job of a much, much more higher quality person, but they don't want to pay for that person. That's why the senior manager that we currently have is a higher, excuse me, he was a promotion from a lower tier job into this job because they couldn't find someone that was willing to work for $20,000 less per year at market value. They tried, but unfortunately, every time they would find a person desperate enough to take that much responsibility for that job, they were getting an incredibly low quality worker. It's like every time I hire a Gen Z now, they're an incredibly low quality worker. But they don't really have a choice. Ask any person who can't afford to work today why they took that job, and every one of them will tell you the reason. I know it's not a lot of money, but I need to work. And so they're coming into a job economy that's designed for them not to be able to support themselves. I'll tell you, any one of the graduates who graduated 2 weeks ago from ASU, the 10,000 graduates that are currently looking for a job in this job market, that's already saturated with the graduates from the previous uh, spring graduation and from all the previous semesters, because the universities across America are churning out millions upon millions of entry-level college students with no experience. They have no choice unless their parents are wealthy, which Gen Z's parents, and this has been the the lining that's been through all of my Gen Zs since I started working for this company. All of the Gen Zs have to live at home. Their wages would not support them unless their parents were actively giving them money or they're living at home. So therefore they don't have the $1,800 per month of basic human living costs. Because when your rent is the equivalent of a month's wages at $14.70 an hour, which is the Arizona minimum wage, you have a system that is incredibly broken. And you have sadistic corporations. Do you think the heads of all of the corporations, all the large corporations, or even the small corporations in America don't know what living costs are? They do know what they are. but they're expecting for the government to pick up the tab on food stamps, on affordable housing, and healthcare. Because most low paying jobs don't come with health benefits, don't pay enough for their workers to eat, and definitely don't care that they can't afford a place to live in. And so you have the 99% that are all out there struggling to try and make something of their lives. And as I've said, I've been alive my I've been working my entire adult life. I started working when I was 16 and I still don't own anything. Nothing of any value. And it's a terrible thing to say is that I don't see my future changing in any conceivable way. The future for poor people, the future for the working class in America is going to get worse. If you think if you think things were bad last year, imagine a year where things get even worse than that year. When we get to the year 2026, I'm hoping that the meteorite has finally hit Earth and ended the sufferings of tens of millions, of hundreds of millions of people at the hands of evil corporations. But in case it hasn't, we are going to see homelessness at an epic proportion because there's no way that you can support yourself on the wages that are out there. Even at my current wages, it's still tough. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to make half or a quarter of what I make per year and still be in the same system. Just because you don't have money doesn't mean you get to go into an alternative system. There is no, how do I put this? The classes aren't divided up into, well, you're the lowest of the low class. You get to be on the third deck of the Titanic, right? And there's no place. Everyone is paying the same thing. And this is the way that I like to explain it to people. Okay, you're a minimum wage worker and you need a cell phone, right? You're going to go through your top carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, whatever. Each one of them carries a price tag that's very similar to one another. You can't just decide, well, I'm a low wage earner, so I can't afford a cell phone, so I want a cell phone that costs $10 a month because that's what I can afford to pay. And this is what workers are trying to do. It's like, well, I don't make much money. I can't afford the $1,800 a month for a one bedroom apartment. I need something that's closer to $500 a month because that would be 25% of my income. This is what I can afford to pay. That doesn't work that way in society. Regardless of whether you're a billionaire or you're a minimum wage worker, the prices stay the same for everything. Food, transportation, and housing is a set in stone. This is what you can get for what you earn. And as a person who's had to spend 85% of my monthly income to rent a room while I was working at a call center, I'll tell you, it is not a fair system. And it's getting more and more unfair every day. So, rethinking your relationship between work and what you're worth at the end of the day, it really makes you feel like there should be some correction in the system. It can't stay like this. The fact is, it can't stay like this. It's going to get much worse for poor people. If you think you can't afford to work today, as things progressively get more and more out of control, as inflation keeps going in the wrong direction and wages keep going in the opposite directions, these two things can't exist in the same reality because that reality has tens of millions of people ending up on the street when there are plenty of places for people to live. But it's that greed, it's that disease of greed in which you have to exploit poor people at every corner in order to increase your your wealth at the cost of society. Not there's a cost to having billionaires and rich people in your society. And it's at the detriment of the people who can't get out of the way of the harm that they do.